Hi, there could be a number of reasons why your refrigerator stopped working, and one of them is the thermostat's faulty. So in this video I'll be replacing the thermostat in a Hotpoint FF654 fridge freezer. Before you start work on any appliance, first switch it off from the mains and if possible remove the plug. To start with, empty the fridge compartment and remove all the shelving and salad boxes so you have a clear working area. To prevent the bulb and lens from getting damaged, it's best to remove them before doing any dismantling work. The lens should come off easily and the bulb will just unscrew. The control knob should just pull off, although it may need a bit of persuading. However, if it's really tight, then grip the crossbar with a pair of pliers and pull it off that way. But cover the knob with an old rag first, or the jaws of the pliers will dig into the plastic and you could damage it. It may be useful to just give the thermostat locking nut half a turn to loosen it. This will make it easier to remove it later on. Remove the plug that covers the retaining screw and undo the screw. The housing assembly won't fall off because it hooks into the fridge lining and will need to be slid towards you to release it. Once it's been unhooked, the housing assembly will come away quite easily, but be careful not to pull on it because the wires and the thermostat file are still attached at the other end and they could be damaged if you're too heavy-handed. Remove the cover, and at this point it would be a good idea to take a photo or make a diagram of the terminal connections for when you have to refit the new stat. As I said at the start of this video, there are a few reasons why your refrigerator might not work, and only one of them is the thermostat. So you may want to do an electrical test to be sure that it is the thermostat that's at fault before you replace it. To do this, first remove all the wiring connections. You can leave the earth wire connected if you want to, it won't affect the outcome. Now attach one of the meter probes to the centre terminal and the other to the top outer terminal on the thermostat. Make sure the thermostat is switched on, and if you get a reading, the stat is OK. But if there's no reading, then replace it. The terminal connections stated are for this model, and other models may vary. Some thermostats only have 2 terminals, whilst others have 4. When you're sure the thermostat is at fault, you can continue by removing the wires from the light switch. These wires cross over the rear of the stat and may make it awkward to remove if left attached to the switch. Now, to make things a little easier, refit the housing assembly back onto the fridge lining by hooking it into the fixing slots. It should stay put, but if not, then refit the screw. The 2 screws on the last section of the evaporator plate hold the thermostat file in place, and when they're removed, the retaining bracket on the rear of the panel may fall down. Place the bracket out of the way because you'll need it for refitting the new stat. Now undo the 3 screws holding the evaporator in place. When all the screws are out, ease the top away from the rear of the fridge and twist the right hand side slightly so it misses the thermostat housing as you lower it down. Don't try to pull it away from the rear of the appliance because it's still attached to the fridge via a pipe and it can be damaged if bent too violently. The thermostat file will now be free from the evaporator plate and just hanging loose at the rear of the cabinet. The evaporator will stay where it is and shouldn't move. Remove the housing panel from the side of the cabinet and release the wires attached to the inside. The file is hidden underneath the wires and held in place by them. At this point, unscrew the thermostat retaining nut. You should be able to do this with your fingers if you loosen the nut earlier. The stat will now come free. All that's needed is to unravel it from the wires and pull it out. As you can see, there's a loop formed at the end of the file which fits around the retaining clamp that holds it onto the evaporator plate. This loop must be remade on the new thermostat so it fits back in the same location as the original, and the insulating tubing fitting around the file must also be refitted to the new thermostat for it to work properly. The easiest way to reform the loop in the stat is to wrap it around the retaining bracket before reassembling it. With the evaporator plate currently unfixed to the cabinet, it allows for a bit of movement to enable you to easily see what you're doing regarding the fitting of the screws into the file retaining clamp. I found it easiest to reassemble the file clamp mechanism with the file between both halves of it before attaching it to the evaporator plate and before fitting the stat to the housing. This allows you a bit more room to work in. Feed the file back into the channels the original stat occupied, and be careful when refitting the wires that they go back on the correct terminals. If you took a photo, then refer to it or your diagram for refitting. You'll probably find it easier to refit the wires before the unit's secured in the housing, but check before attaching the unit to the housing that none of the wires have been trapped beneath it. The thermostat has a lip on the casing, which fits into a hole in the housing. This is to prevent the unit from turning, rather than designate which way round it fits. Once the stat's been installed, you can fit the light switch wires, and before replacing the cover plate, just check that all the wires are inside of it and won't snag when the housing is refitted onto the cabinet wall. After replacing the stat housing, it's a simple matter to realign the evaporator plate and screw it back in place, but remember that it will need to be twisted slightly so it will miss the housing assembly. Replace the 3 screws that hold the evaporator onto the rear of the cabinet, but don't tighten them just yet because you may need to adjust the plate in order to align all the screws. Once you have them all fitted and the plate looks even, then tighten them. Replace the light bulb and the lens cover, put the plug back in the screw hole and refit the control knob. Before you switch the appliance on, check it has a good earth by attaching one probe from your meter to the earth pin on the mains plug and the other on any part of the exposed metal on the machine. You should get a reading on the meter if the appliance is earthed. If there's no reading on your meter, then the machine is not earthed and potentially unsafe, therefore needs further investigation. On behalf of Selfix UK, we'd like to thank you for watching this video and hope you found it interesting. Goodbye.